Hello everyone, Vulcan here, and as you see, I'm still alive. I do apologize for my absence these past few weeks. The reason for this is because, as some of you may know, I've been in the process of moving homes and that's taken up a lot of my time and focus. Thankfully, I've now moved to a new place and can begin providing content for you guys once more. While Volume 4 has ended, there is still room for creating discussions and theories, and that's what I'll be doing today. In this video, I'll begin to talk about a subject that I've wanted to talk about for a while now, and as you can see from the title, this video is about shipping. I'll specifically be talking about four of the most popular ships within the fandom, those being White Rose and Lancaster, followed by Bumblebee and Black Sun, in a part 2 of this video. The aim will be to compare those ships with common characters, meaning I'll be looking into White Rose versus Lancaster and Bumblebee versus Black Sun. Before that, however, I want to make some general comments on shipping in RWBY. What I find by far the greatest appeal of the series is not the romantic feelings two characters share for one another, or more than two in case there's a need to specify that, but seeing as the series doesn't seem to have any examples of polygamy, I digress. Miles even said that he's not very good at writing romance, and that's why he would rather not want to put it at the forefront of the story. Rather, the main appeal of RWBY is the action, the animation, and the overall storytelling. The latter does have some problems, but that's not greatly significant to the point where it breaks the show's credibility. Otherwise, it wouldn't have gained such a sizable following, even to the point of becoming one of Rooster Teeth's flagships next to Red vs. Blue. On top of that, the animation also has points that could use some improvement, particularly the choreography at this point, but this is an aspect that I very strongly believe will improve, as it has been over the course of the story with each volume. As such, the shipping isn't an all-important element of the story to me. While this video may or may not showcase my endorsement of any given pairing, whether or not a pairing becomes canon at all is not something that will lead me to think any less of RWBY as a whole. Unless a crack ship becomes canon, because there's a number of such ships being talked about, jokingly or otherwise, within the fandom. So at the end of the day, RWBY isn't a story about two particular characters, but an entire cast of characters. We see it in Red vs. Blue, and we're seeing it in RWBY as well. While we do have a group which comprises of four main characters, each character apart from them all have a great deal to contribute to the overarching plot, and that's something I like about Rooster Teeth's storytelling technique. It doesn't have a tendency to leave characters behind to be forgotten like other stories do, such as Naruto and to a lesser extent One Piece. To me, that level of character development is where RWBY has the most potential and what is more appealing as opposed to the romance. So with that out of the way, let's get on with comparing the four ships, and we begin with White Rose versus Lancaster for this first part of the video. Both ships involve RWBY, with the former pairing her with Weiss and the latter pairing her with Jean. I can understand why there are many who would like to see RWBY and Jean together, particularly with recent events in Volume 4 as RWBY worked closely with Jean and the remainder of Juniper. This volume was certainly the one in which RWBY and Jean had plenty of opportunities to grow close to one another, and they certainly seem to have done so, although there were aspects of their development which I feel were cut short. Additionally, Jean was the first person RWBY had any meaningful interaction with when she first arrived at Beacon Academy. However, consider the following. Aside from their first meeting, the most significant interactions between them include the time when Jean was uncertain about his position as leader of Juniper in Volume 1, and one instance in Volume 4 when Jean reassured RWBY that they chose to accompany her to Mistral rather than being dragged into it. By significant interactions, I refer to the sort which led to some kind of character development. All other interactions between them were either casual, such as when RWBY and Jean had a brief talk at the Beacon dance party, and later at the start of Volume 3 when Pyrrha offered to pay for everyone's lunch. For there to be a strong suggestion that RWBY and Jean have potential as of Volume 4, you need to compare how Jean behaved around RWBY in that volume with how Jean behaved around Pyrrha in earlier volumes. In every volume before the fourth, Jean had at least one significant interaction with Pyrrha, each one leading to a more significant development in Jean than the last, as well as the two growing closer to each other, so much that thoughts of anyone else were very clearly overshadowed by thoughts of each other. Even when Jean was uncertain about his position as leader and RWBY encouraged him, Jean still had thoughts of the rest of his team in his mind first. It's also worth mentioning that he never actively sought out RWBY for advice, but merely had a chance meeting with her. So even as far back as the earliest days of RWBY, everyone else close to Jean was more important to him than RWBY was, and in Volume 4, right before the moment when Jean reassured RWBY, he expressed concern for Ren and Nora being out there rather than feeling he had to protect RWBY when they heard the Nakalavi. Granted, RWBY could become more important to him in the future, but as of right now, nothing hinting at any romantic interest in Jean's part has been shown. All instances so far show that his teammates took priority over RWBY, which leads me to think that even when you disregard his thoughts of Pyrrha in Volume 4, Jean never thought of RWBY as anything more than a friend. The same can be said for RWBY herself. While RWBY did offer Jean advice on how to be a team leader in Volume 1, this case was writing off her own experience involving Weiss, which taught her how to be a responsible leader in her own right. She didn't do it out of sheer concern for Jean, but rather because she felt that she was in the right position to give him advice, which of course she was. There's also the point I mentioned earlier about it being a chance meeting rather than Jean seeking her out, or in RWBY's case, wanting to see how Jean was holding up. And in Volume 4, her concern was more about how she was afraid of seeing everyone around her getting hurt as a result of dragging all of Team Juniper into her wild goose chase, especially after what happened with Crow. She didn't specifically show concern for Jean above anyone else, but concern for you guys, referring to Juniper. This to me shows that up to Volume 4, RWBY also sees Jean only as a friend. By the same token of logic that Jean was the first person RWBY got to really speak to at Beacon, Weiss was the one RWBY was partnered with during the initial test. From that perspective, it's also easy for me to see why people want to see RWBY pairing up with Weiss in a romantic sense. Their relationship got off to a rocky start thanks to RWBY's clumsiness and Weiss's princess complex, and when the two were partnered up together, it wasn't looking to be a smooth relationship. So right from the beginning, it was clear that the two were bringing out emotions from within each other. One example is how Weiss's princess complex made the usually jovial and optimistic RWBY frustrated enough to take it out on an unsuspecting Tree. Despite their disagreements, RWBY was trying her best to be the greatest partner Weiss could ask for, although not because she was romantically interested in her at that point in time, but that ended up backfiring due to her inexperience interacting with others, which is an important point I'll get to later on in this video. However, not long after this, Weiss showed that she was softening up by willing to work with RWBY after saving her from the Deathstalker, recognizing RWBY's efforts to be useful to Weiss by proving she was capable, contrary to Weiss's initial doubt about her. So without even needing to have a lengthy one-to-one interaction, the two grew closer to each other, which was symbolized by how well they fought the Nevermore together. Things still weren't going to be smooth between the two when it was revealed that RWBY would be the leader of the team rather than Weiss, and seeing RWBY act irresponsibly in class only made her more frustrated. This is important because while Weiss believed only she could be the leader of the team, her frustration with RWBY went beyond her princess complex, as she was also angered by how she would have to work under a leader who was not exemplary. She let RWBY know about her frustration, saying Ozpin made a mistake, which further cast doubt in RWBY, and this was a pivotal moment in RWBY's development because she had to look within herself to recognize her faults. At the same time, this was also the moment in which Weiss would have to look within herself as well and recognize that as a leader, she would do no better due to her belittling attitude. When Professor Port pointed out her flaws, Weiss realized that putting herself ahead of others was no different than RWBY's own indifference toward her responsibilities as a leader. This gave her the incentive to truly work with RWBY and put her team's interests ahead of her own. And it was what gave both characters the chance to grow closer, so much that even by the end of Volume 1, the two were generally in sync. This development is also very important for both because they helped each other break out of their respective shells. RWBY was able to become more relaxed around others thanks to Weiss, and Weiss became more humble. This was more significant than anything Jean did for RWBY. Their casual interactions always showed how well the two had bonded since the early episodes. When you compare it with the way Jean and RWBY interacted with one another in Volume 4, it's evident that RWBY is closer to Weiss because they always appeared more relaxed around one another compared to anyone else. This is especially true for Weiss when you consider how she is around others in Volume 4. From this, I strongly believe that at the bare minimum, RWBY is much closer to Weiss than she is with Jean, and it's for this reason that as of now, I would say that White Rose is the stronger ship, and one that I would welcome given that the relationship between Jean and RWBY doesn't change. Of course, this could just mean that RWBY and Weiss are very close friends and their relationship won't go anywhere beyond that, which is fine. At the end of the day, RWBY isn't about romance, but an overarching story that goes past that, as I said earlier in this video. As things stand, however, I am more willing to support White Rose as a ship over Lancaster due to the nature of the relationships RWBY has with Weiss and Jean. So that is part 1 of my shipping discussion. Look out for part 2, which is set to come out later in the week and will cover Bumblebee vs Black Sun, along with a theory video that I plan on releasing before that. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, so please leave a like if you did, comment down below which of the two ships you prefer, and of course subscribe to my channel to see more such discussions. I hope to see you again soon, and have a great day.